The day my husband handed me divorce papers, I was still in my scrubs from a 12-hour night shift and I hadn't even gotten my shoes off. He'd laid them on the kitchen counter. Not handed them to me, laid them there like he was leaving mail. I heard the flat, deliberate sound they made when he set them down, and I looked at him and I thought, he rehearsed this. He picked the moment. He waited until I was too tired to have anything left. "I want you out by the end of the month," he said. "My name is Maura. I'm 36 years old. I've been a registered nurse for 11 years, most of them in an ICU, and I've held the hands of people taking their last breaths. I thought that kind of experience would make me harder to break. I thought I'd seen enough endings that one more wouldn't undo me. I was wrong about that. We'd been married for 8 years. I met my husband at a rooftop party in Nashville the summer before his second year of law school. He was 28, and he had that particular kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly where you're going without having gotten there yet. I was 27 and working double shifts and splitting a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 other nurses and paying down student loans on a schedule I'd made in a spreadsheet. I wasn't someone who needed saving. I want to be clear about that. But he made me feel like being ambitious together was different from being ambitious alone, and I believed him, and for a long time I wasn't wrong. I co-signed the car loan when his credit was too thin. I picked up weekend shifts while he studied. When he passed the bar and opened his own real estate law practice 4 years ago, I took $30,000 from the inheritance my grandmother left me and put it into his firm because the bank wouldn't extend his line of credit far enough and he needed the office to look legitimate before it was legitimate. He told me it was a loan. He wrote me a note, handwritten on a piece of legal pad paper. "Thank you for believing in this. I'll make it up to you." I kept the note. I kept everything. I'm a person who keeps things. He never paid me back. I stopped asking after the first year. The other thing I put money into was fertility treatments, 3 full rounds of IVF over 4 years. Each cycle ran about $15,000 by the time you added medications and monitoring appointments, and everything insurance decided was optional. I made a spreadsheet for that too. Not because tracking it helped, but because staring at numbers at 2 in the morning felt safer than staring at the ceiling. The 3rd cycle failed in March. My husband was at a work dinner when I got the call from my OB's office. I sat in the hospital parking garage for 40 minutes. Then I drove home. Then I made dinner and didn't say much. And he asked how my day was, and I said fine. He wasn't at a work dinner. I found out 6 weeks later, not because I was looking, but because the hotel sent a receipt confirmation to our shared email account by mistake. His card, his name. A room at a Marriott in Franklin on a Tuesday night when he told me he was at a deposition in Murfreesboro. 2 nights. He'd been home for both breakfasts. She was his paralegal, 24 years old. She'd been working in his office for 14 months. I'd met her at the firm's Christmas party and complimented her hair, because it was beautiful hair, and she'd said thank you, and I'd gone home and helped my husband hang his coat. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He said, "You've been so focused on the baby stuff, we grew apart." I said, "I was focused on the baby stuff because you said you wanted children." He said, "I thought I did." Then he handed me the divorce papers. Then he said he wanted the house. The house had his mother's name on the mortgage because his practice wasn't profitable enough yet when we bought it. My $30,000 had gone into the firm, not the property. In Tennessee, what as marital property and what doesn't can get complicated. My husband is a real estate attorney. He'd spent 2 years making sure that when he finally asked me to leave, the ground he was standing on would be more solid than mine. What he didn't account for was that I know how to ask for help. A colleague of mine had survived a brutal divorce 3 years earlier and come out standing. She gave me the name of her attorney, a woman who practiced family law out of a small office on Church Street. I called the next morning. I told her everything, and when I got to the part about the $30,000, I heard her typing. She said, "Do you have documentation?" "I have a folder, an actual physical folder, manila, labeled in my own handwriting with every financial decision I've ever made going back to 2016. Bank statements showing the withdrawal, email exchanges between me and my husband about the transfer, the handwritten note on legal pad paper. "Thank you for believing in this. I'll make it up to you." My attorney said that note was going to be very useful. I moved in with a coworker while I figured things out. I went to work every day. I cried in the shower and in my car and on the phone with my sister in Portland. And then I went back to the unit because people in the ICU needed me, and grief, I have learned, does not excuse you from showing up. The divorce took 9 months. My husband's attorney argued that the $30,000 was a gift. My attorney introduced the correspondence, the note, and a financial expert who testified to the documented connection between my capital and the firm's increased operational value. I didn't get the house. His mother's co-signature on the mortgage made that genuinely complicated, and I wasn't going to fight a battle I couldn't win cleanly. What I got was $58,000 in settlement, plus a separate structured repayment of the original $30,000 from the firm on a court-ordered schedule. I also got my grandmother's jewelry back. His mother had come to the house 2 days after I moved out and taken a small wooden box from the closet in what had been my sewing room. The box held a garnet bracelet, 2 gold rings, and a cameo brooch that had belonged to my great-grandmother. My attorney sent a letter to my mother-in-law's home address within the week. Return the items within 10 business days, or we file a formal report with Metro Nashville Police for theft of personal property. The box appeared on my coworker's porch 9 days later. My mother-in-law didn't leave a note. I didn't expect one. I want you to understand something about that stretch of time, because I think people get it wrong. I wasn't falling apart. I was grieving, the way nurses grieve, putting one foot in front of the other, saving the feeling for when you're off the clock. But I wasn't passive. I wasn't waiting. I was building something, very deliberately, out of what I had left. By August, I had a signed lease on a small rental cottage in a town called Millhaven, 40 minutes east of Nashville, right on the edge of Percy Priest Lake. It wasn't much of a town. A diner, a bait shop, a post office, a gas station whose hot dogs were better than they had any right to be. But the cottage had a screened porch and a maple tree in the backyard, and the rent was $950 a month, which I could manage without asking anyone for anything. I'd set up automatic payments. I had a new lease in my own name. I had $58,000 in a savings account that was mine alone. I had a neighbor. He was on his porch steps when I pulled up with the moving truck, a man my approximate age with a coffee mug in one hand and a black Labrador at his feet. When he saw me struggling with a box that was too big for one person, he set the mug down, walked across the grass without me asking, and took the other end. We carried it inside. He set his side down carefully. "I'm the neighbor," he said. "Harlan, Maura," I said. "Thank you. Coffee's on if you want it later." He went back to his porch. I went back to the truck. I didn't take him up on it that day. I was too raw, and I'd spent 8 years in a situation where I'd trusted someone too quickly, and I wasn't going to make that mistake again in the first 48 hours of my new life. But I noticed things about him over the next few weeks. He shoveled the shared stretch of gravel driveway after a September storm without being asked. When a raccoon got into my trash cans, he helped me figure out a better latch without making a production of it. When I came home late from a double and my porch light was out, there was a new bulb on my doormat the next morning. He had a workshop behind his house. I could hear it on weekend mornings, the steady, focused sounds of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He drove a 10-year-old Ford pickup truck. He wore plain clothes. When I ran into him at the gas station, he asked how I was settling in and listened to the actual answer. He didn't overshare. He didn't ask about my life before Millhaven. He seemed to understand, without my having to say so, that I'd come here to be left alone to do something, and he respected that. In October, we fell into a habit. I'd get home from my shift and he'd be on the porch, and I'd make decaf and he'd bring whatever he'd baked that afternoon. Cornbread, biscuits, once a very good apple cake, and we'd sit with the lake in front of us and talk, or not talk, and both were fine. "What did you do before?" I asked him one evening, when the air had turned cool and the lake was going gold at the edges. "Before here?" He thought about it. "Government work. That covers a lot of ground." "It does," he said, and smiled at the water, and left it there. I didn't push. I had things I wasn't ready to talk about either. The divorce was finalized in the first week of November. My attorney called during my lunch break. I went out to the hospital's small courtyard, a healing garden nobody used in cold weather, and sat on a concrete bench and heard her say it was done. I had my settlement. I was free. I cried for about 3 minutes. Then I went back inside and ate my sandwich. That weekend, I went to dinner at my coworker's house and drank 2 glasses of wine and danced in her kitchen and felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight. For so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. I didn't know yet that I was pregnant. I found out in December. 6 weeks along, the drugstore test confirmed, sitting on the tile floor of a Walgreens single-stall bathroom on a Tuesday evening because I couldn't make myself wait until I got home. Natural conception, no injections, no monitoring appointments, no co-pays, no spreadsheet, Just 2 lines on a test I'd almost talked myself out of buying. I sat there for a long time. Then I called my sister. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. We stayed on with each other for almost 2 hours, and by the end of it I was laughing more than I was crying, and I thought, okay, I can figure this out. Then I walked across the gravel driveway and knocked on Harlan's door. He answered in a flannel shirt with flower on the sleeve, and he looked at my face and stepped aside without a word. I sat down at his kitchen table. He sat across from me, his dog put his head on my knee. Harlan waited. "I'm pregnant," I said. A pause. "Is that? I don't know yet what it is," I said. "I'm still deciding what it is." He nodded. He got up and filled 2 glasses of water and set one in front of me. Then he sat back down and let me talk. I told him about the 3 IVF cycles. About the failed 3rd round in March, the empty parking garage, the dinner I made when I got home because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I told him that I'd been divorced for 6 weeks and that my body had apparently decided to do now what it refused to do for 4 years, and that I didn't know whether to feel grateful or furious or just purely stunned. "Bodies are strange," he said. "They really are." He didn't make it about himself. He didn't say anything hollow about it happening for a reason or everything working out. He just sat with me until I stopped shaking, and then he made me eat something, and then he asked what I needed and listened while I told him. What happened after that was slow and careful and genuinely surprising to me because I hadn't been looking for it, and I decided I didn't want it, and it happened anyway. He drove me to my prenatal appointments when I was too tired to drive and sat in the waiting room with a library book. He put together the prenatal vitamins my midwife recommended into a weekly pill organizer and left it on my porch with no note because the gesture was enough. He didn't crowd me. He didn't perform. In February, he was with me in the ultrasound room when the technician moved the wand and the screen filled with sound, 2 heartbeats. "Twins," the technician said. I said, "Can you say that again?" Harlan laughed, not a polite sound, a real one, full and surprised, the kind of laugh that takes over a whole body. It filled the small room and I started laughing too. And the technician was smiling at both of us, and I thought, I couldn't have planned this. I couldn't have invented this on my best day. He proposed in March, under the maple tree in my backyard when the first buds were coming in. He didn't make it a performance. He had my grandmother's garnet bracelet in his jacket pocket. He'd called my sister in December, sworn her to silence, asked for the bracelet, because he said he wanted to give me something that already meant something to me before it meant something to us. He put it on my wrist. He said what he had to say. I didn't let him finish the sentence. We married in May at the county clerk's office, with my sister and Harlan's older brother as witnesses. His brother drove down from Charlottesville and cried twice during the paperwork and apologized both times, which made Harlan laugh again, that same real laugh. After, we went to the diner and had pancakes, and the dog sat under the table hoping for something to fall, and the morning light came through the windows at the angle it gets right before the heat sets in, and the whole thing felt entirely real and entirely mine. The divorce had been final for 6 months. I want that to be absolutely clear. Not a legal gray area, not rushed, not complicated. 6 months, a signed decree, and a woman who had taken her time. I learned the truth about Harlan in pieces, the way you learn things about a person who has learned to be careful. He didn't hide it with intention. It was more that he'd built a life without it, and inviting it back in took time. He'd spent 14 years with the FBI, the last 5 as a supervisory special agent on a financial crimes task force based out of the Washington field office. He was good at the work, methodical, patient, the kind of person who followed the money the way other people follow a scent. He was also, for 2 of those years, married. His wife died on a February evening when black ice formed on I-66 outside Arlington, and she lost control of her car on her way home from visiting her mother. He'd been in a classified briefing when it happened and unreachable for 2 hours. He found out in a hallway. From his supervisor, he left the bureau 8 months later. He moved to Millhaven because a colleague knew about the property, and Harlan needed somewhere that didn't know his name. The money. And there was money which I hadn't known about and which genuinely startled me when I found out, came through his mother's family. Her father had held pharmaceutical patents from the late 1980s, and the licensing revenue had been compounding in a trust for nearly 4 decades. Harlan had barely touched it. He lived the way he lived because he was, at his core, a person who found peace in making things with his hands and didn't particularly want more than he needed. I found out about the trust not because he told me, but because his brother mentioned it at Christmas, offhandedly, the way families mention things they assume everyone already knows. Harlan's face when his brother said it, this brief, complicated stillness, was the most unguarded I'd ever seen him. That night, after his brother had gone to bed, I sat down with my husband at the kitchen table and I said, "Tell me." He told me everything, the trust, the bureau, his wife, the accident, the 2 hours in the hallway. He talked without stopping for a long time, and I drank chamomile tea and didn't interrupt, and the dog slept at our feet. When he finished, I said, "None of that changes anything for me." He looked at me the way people look when they're not sure they heard something right. "I should have told you earlier," he said. "Yes," I said. "But you told me now. We didn't talk about the money in the way people on the outside might expect. No discussions of what to do with it, no sudden changes to how we lived." What it meant, practically, was that when the twins came early, 6 weeks before my due date, the way twins often do, in a rush and without apology, they came into a world with every resource available to them. A father who'd spent 14 years learning to protect people. A mother who'd spent 11 years learning to keep people alive. They were born on a Thursday morning in late July, a boy and a girl. The boy came first, screaming, indignant about it, already taking up space. The girl came 3 minutes later, quiet, eyes open, looking around the room like she was assessing the situation. My midwife laughed and said she'd never seen a newborn look so deliberate. My husband cut both cords. He cried both times. He's not embarrassed about it, and I love him for that more than I can easily say. I heard about my ex-husband's situation over the months, the way you hear things in circles that used to overlap with yours, word reaching you from people who knew people who'd been there. The first piece came from my coworker in Nashville in January. There was talk about the firm. His paralegal had left her position abruptly in October, and the timing of her departure had coincided with a client complaint about certain account transactions during a period when the firm had been cash poor. The Tennessee's Board of Professional Responsibility had opened a preliminary inquiry. The details were still developing, but the core of it, from what I understood, involved commingling of client funds with firm operating expenses during the same stretch of years when I'd put my $30,000 in. When I heard that, I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfaction. Something older and more tired than that. The feeling of understanding, finally, the full shape of something you'd only seen the edges of. The cash flow problems he'd described to me, the urgency around my inheritance, the loan he'd said he'd repay. The second piece came from my sister who'd stayed loosely connected with some mutual false friends. His paralegal had not been pregnant with his child. She'd been seeing one of his law partners at the same time, a detail that came to light when that man's wife hired an investigator. The news surfaced simultaneously in both households. Both partnerships, professional and personal. Consaps within the same quarter. My ex-husband and his former colleague were now in litigation over the ethics violations and the firm's dissolution. The house was listed for sale in March. I know that because a mutual acquaintance texted me a Zillow link without comment. I looked at the listing photos for about 2 minutes. The kitchen still had the tile backsplash I'd picked out. The guest room where I'd kept my sewing things looked smaller than I remembered. I closed the tab. I didn't need to go back there. Everything I needed to understand about that chapter of my life I already understood. I had given it the best version of myself I had at the time, and the best version of myself had been worth more than that. My daughter looks like me. My son looks like my husband. Some mornings I stand in the doorway of the nursery and watch them sleep. They're in the same crib because they won't be separated, and the pediatrician says this is common in twins and they'll eventually want their own space. But for now they sleep pressed together the way they started, and some part of me finds that more comforting than I know how to explain. I stand there and I think about the years I spent assuming the fertility failures were my fault. The injections, the wait, the silent drive home from the parking garage. There was nothing wrong with me. There never was. My grandmother's cameo brooch sits on my dresser. I look at it in the mornings sometimes. This woman I loved, who raised her children alone after her husband left and worked as a seamstress and owned her home outright by the time she was 60. She used to say the world would test you to see if you knew your own worth. I was slow to learn that lesson. I made it expensive and I took the long way around, but I learned it. My husband comes up behind me in the nursery doorway sometimes early in the morning when the lake is still. He puts one hand on my shoulder, and we stand there and we don't say anything because we don't need to. The dog sits at our feet, The light comes in off the water the way it does in the summers here, low and patient and not trying to be anything other than what it is. I chose this town. I signed my own lease. I found my own attorney and I fought for what was mine, and I didn't apologize for taking up space. I asked for help when I needed it, and I let the right people in at the right speed, and I did not confuse someone's capacity to hurt me with proof that I deserved to be hurt. Life gave me back what I was supposed to have. Not because I waited quietly and kept my head down, but because I stopped letting the wrong people decide what I was worth. I'm standing at the edge of a lake in a place I chose for myself, with a family I never could have planned and a morning that begins the same every day, steady and real and entirely mine.